We are going to start 1:05. If you have any other colleagues that are wanting to join your lunch break, now is the time to share the webinar link with them still, because today we actually have quite a bit of time to dive a bit deeper into the SDI for CE strategy and then also have some questions. So if you want to share it last minute with anyone, that would be very appreciated. But as I said, I'm going to give everyone quite a few more minutes to just join. We have around about, what was it, Mark? 320?
347.
47 people. No pressure, Linda. Great, and I can already see people are introducing themselves on the chat, so that's wonderful. It's quite a lot of different people. I can see there is private industry. I can also see there are some researchers and academics online. There are some governmental officials online as well, and I can see there are more and more messages coming in, so please introduce yourself in the chat. I can also see quite a few known names in here, so it's really lovely to see more people that have previously joined our webinars as well in our community. Give us 2 more minutes and then we're going to dive into it. Lovely. I also actually see some SMEs online, which is fantastic. Welcome as well. That's really nice. Okay, I am going to start sharing my presentation. So Mark, let me share my screen and I hope it loads.
It's visible. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Fantastic, cool. Welcome everybody to this webinar. It has been long overdue. We've actually planned this already last year, but then we just needed a little bit more time because so much has happened last year as well. So it's really nice to have this webinar. It's the first webinar of the year for Circular South Africa, and it's so lovely to see so many of you online. As I said, please still share the link if you want to, but as always, we do record the session and it is available on our YouTube channel online under Circular South Africa. So today we are really looking at where is Circular Innovation South Africa now. And as I've already mentioned, we are going to have quite a bit of time today to cover the different topics. So Prof Linda Godfrey is our guest and the spotlight is going to be on her. And we're really looking at framing the context of what the CSIR has been busy with. So basically the foundation of Circular Innovation South Africa. Then we're diving deeper into the first circular science, technology, innovation strategy. And I think maybe, Linda, you can confirm it's still one of the only ones that we know globally, an SDI strategy. So that's quite something novel. And then we're going to also feature some of the circular economy SDI activities. And at the end, you have quite a bit of time to also ask Prof Godfrey some questions. So I'm very pleased to welcome you today. I'm Katerina Geering. I'm going to be your host. And with me online, I have, as I said, Prof Godfrey and also Mark Lamani from CISA. So let's dive into it. As always, we do a bit of a spiel about what Circular South Africa is. Most of you probably have heard that before, but we are the circular economy platform for South Africa, amplifying the potential and value of the just circular economy across South Africa. We are hosted on an initiative of the African Circular Economy Network. So why is circular economy and why do we even bother to spend so much time with it? Well, we know that in South Africa, our economy is very extractive based and that has led to resource depletion, social inequality, and environmental degradation. And the circular economy provides South Africa with a regenerative alternative. As always, we need to mention circular economy. We don't understand it merely as recycling or waste management, but really it is intentional design of products and services. And it has 3 globally accepted fundamental principles around designing out waste and pollution, keeping materials at their highest values, regenerating natural systems, and we always add the fourth principle to it, which is benefiting all members of society, to also speak about the social element of a circular economy that is definitely needed. Okay, now I can actually already hand over to Linda. We're not going to jump into the Q&A session just now. Linda, I'm going to unshare, and then I'm handing over to you so that you can start sharing the presentation from your side. Please, perfect. Just Linda, before you go ahead, anyone else that hasn't introduced themselves into the chat, please introduce yourself. It's really nice to see where you're from and also the region that you're coming from. So we're very excited to see you online. Linda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Katarina. Thank you, Mark. I think everyone has seen my face, so I'm going to turn off my camera before I start presenting, just to make sure that I don't affect the quality of our presentation today. So I'm going to just get the slides up, and you can confirm with me that
it's visible. Yeah, perfect.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And thank you to Circular South Africa for the opportunity to reflect, I think, on the 10-year journey up until now through the Waste Research Development and Innovation Roadmap, and where we are going forward in terms of circular innovation in South Africa. So just to reconfirm the outline of the presentation as highlighted by Katarina, the framing, the context. Yeah, I want to take the opportunity to really reflect on the Waste Roadmap, which was the entry point into government's new circular economy strategy. And in preparing for this presentation today, it was a wonderful opportunity just to consolidate the last 10 years of our work, to then present on government's circular economy, science, technology and innovation strategy. And I do apologize for all the acronyms. I think we work in a sector that is acronym rich. So if I do refer to STI, it's around science, technology and innovation. And then I also want to reflect on our portfolio of current circular economy STI activities and how we see that moving forward. So first of all, anyone who has seen my presentations knows that I always start with this slide. And I think it's just to make sure that we're all on the same page of how we are interpreting the circular economy. And I'm very proud of the fact that the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation took a broad definition of the circular economy in the national strategy, that it's not just about waste management, it's not a synonym for recycling. The circular economy is seen in the STI strategy as being about sustainable resource management. And I always go so far as to say that I do believe the circular economy is about national resource security in support of socio-economic development. So it asks us to rethink our relationship with the resources that we use every day, whether it be as business, whether it be as industry or as consumers. So over the past 10 to 15 years, the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation had developed and implemented several sector STI roadmaps and strategies that were already aligned with and relevant to a circular economy, but still functioning to some degree in silos. So the first of these was the bioeconomy strategy. We then saw the 10-year waste research development and innovation roadmap, the water RDI roadmap. And then we've seen some strategies which really kind of, I suppose, operate at the periphery of the circular economy, the additive manufacturing strategy, the STI for sustainable human settlement. So again, how we live and work, our cities and towns, mobility and movement between our cities and the resources we use. And then the hydrogen society roadmap, which starts to speak to alternative energy sources. And I think there's still some debate in terms of, does renewable energy sit within the circular economy paradigm, or is it a circular economy fueled by renewable energy technologies? Waste has typically been the entry point into the circular economy for the other countries that have advanced quite strongly into the circular economy domain. It's the logical low-hanging fruit. And so even though on my first slide I said that the circular economy is not about waste management or only about waste management, it's certainly the easy entry point into the circular economy discussion. And similarly in South Africa, we see that government's 10-year waste research development and innovation roadmap was a precursor to the new circular economy, science, technology and innovation strategy. So I want to spend some time on the waste roadmap in terms of the thinking behind the roadmap, what we aim to achieve what we invested in, and some of the impacts that we've seen come from that 10-year roadmap. The waste roadmap focused on 5 priority waste streams: on municipal waste, organic waste, electronic waste, waste plastic, and waste tires. And these 5 priority waste streams were identified through stakeholder engagement workshops back in 2013, 2014. So these were the priority waste streams that the waste sector said, we believe there's an important role for research, development, and innovation to play in advancing these particular subsectors. So the roadmap was really about using science, technology, and innovation to firstly strengthen capability and capacity, to support more effective decision-making, the faster insertion of context-appropriate technology in South Africa, and where appropriate, the export of know-how and technology both to the continent and the rest of the world. You'll also see that on many of my slides, I've included the URL where you can find the documents that I'm actually referring to. So the presentation, I'm sure, will be made available afterwards, and you can read into more of these documents as we go along. So let's look at the portfolio of R&D projects, and this is by no means complete. There were a total of 59 grant projects that were awarded over the 10 years of the roadmap, and this is to give you a flavor of what we were looking at. So first of all, the question was around improving our understanding of some of the big waste issues that we're facing South Africa. And if you've had a look at the waste roadmap, you'll know that there were 6 clusters. Waste and society strategic planning were 2 of those. And so these are grant projects that align with these 2 particular clusters. The very first grant that we actually awarded under the waste roadmap was the grant to Professor Sampson, who was then at Wits University, now at the University of Johannesburg, looking at lessons from informal waste picker integration initiatives. And we know the incredible research that has come from this original grant project, a significant number of students that did their studies and completed their dissertations on this topic, which fed into the national discussion around the development of guidelines for waste picker integration, and then the inclusion of the informal waste sector, for example, in our EPR regulations, and the financial compensation for the role that they play in collecting recycling. We've also funded studies around understanding societal behavior on illegal dumping. This work was undertaken by Professor Schenk, who is our SACHI Chair in Waste and Society based at the University of the Western Cape, and really did deep, meaningful work around understanding why people do dump waste. We see this more and more across our cities and towns in South Africa, the illegal dumping of waste in response to essentially plateaued waste collection services in the country. Work done by Dr. Skuman at the University of Johannesburg looked specifically at the informal sector in the e-waste sector, training them in that area. The work that Professor Schenk did around clean cities and towns then also developed further into a later grant project that she undertook looking at single-use disposable diaper usage, particularly in our rural areas. And I think anyone working in the waste sector knows the growing problem that we have around the dumping of disposable diapers, particularly in our rural provinces and in our smaller towns. And some really innovative work. And I'm hoping that people can join the waste conference that's happening on the 3rd to the 5th of March, where Professor Schenk will also be talking about this topic and some of the novel economic measures, I think, that have been taken to support women in our rural provinces and towns with regards to disposal use. Work that was done by Dr. Nike at Durban University of Technology around food literacy, particularly addressing this issue around food waste. Again, we know a significant problem in South Africa, or not only South Africa, but globally, the fact that around 1/3 of all food is lost or waste. And so understanding household behavior with regards to food, and importantly in that food literacy. And for each of these projects, you can find the deliverables that they've produced, whether it be technical reports, student dissertations, journal papers, presentations. You can find for each one of these grant projects on their particular research page all of the deliverables which are publicly available, because these were publicly funded by the DSTI. Furthering this issue around understanding the waste issues facing South Africa, we then start to look into the modeling and analytics cluster of the waste roadmap. So work that Anton Neyman did at the CSR, developing a decision support tool for implementing separation at source. So to help municipalities to decide on what is the most appropriate and cost-effective separation at source measures to be adopted. And they're looking at various different options with regards to separation at source. The seminal work that was done by Professor Olofse at the CSR, many of you may have seen this national study. It was an update on the data around food losses and waste. It's data that's very often referenced in any paper or publication around food losses and waste in South Africa. So a really meaningful study that was published. This very contentious issue sometimes around carrier bags. Which are the most appropriate carrier bags to use? Is it plastic? Is it biodegradable plastic? Is it paper? A study done by Dr. Russo at the CSR, a life cycle analysis comparing different carrier bag options. There was the work done by Professor Joubert at the University of Pretoria, which was modeling municipal waste at household level demand estimation. So really innovative work around taking some of the Stats SA spatial data and using that to estimate municipal waste generation. And some of that then later fed into the work of Professor Schenk when they actually started to model the number of disposable diapers that were actually being generated in communities, and staggering figures that came out of that modeling work. Another really important study that was undertaken was, again, by Professor Olofse, and I will say the names that we're giving here are just the principal investigators. For most of these, there's a significantly large team of researchers behind the principal investigator. So the next study was the application of the pathways model. If anyone is familiar with the Breaking the Plastic Wave study that was published in, I think, 2020 or 21, which modeled the leakage of plastic to global oceans, South Africa was the first country in the world that took that global model and applied it at the national level. And a really insightful study in terms of the leakage points of plastic into the environment, but also highlighted that while marine plastic pollution is a significant issue in South Africa, what far outstrips that is the open burning of plastic and the leakage of plastic to the terrestrial environment. A study by Professor Troyce at the University of KwaZulu-Natal under our Waste and Climate Change Chair looked at waste management modeling as a climate stabilization wedge. So essentially looking at different technology solutions and how that benefits or supports climate mitigation. And then further life cycle analysis work undertaken by Dr. Russo and team was the development of guidelines and product category rules. Anyone working in the producer responsibility and EPR space will know the new life cycle analysis requirements under our EPR regulations. So how do we support brand owners, producers, and PROs to better align and enable with those regulatory requirements? I'm going into these in quite some detail because, as I said, when I reflected on these, I was really proud of the work that's been done. And so I want to actually take some time to highlight the excellent work that the research community has done on each of these grant projects. We then get into the waste and environment cluster of the waste roadmap and the work of Professor Ryan at UCT, who is we know, the father of the term microplastics when it comes to plastic and marine pollution. It was really sort of the forefather of much of the research being done around marine plastic pollution and debris in South Africa. And he looked at the different types of interception mechanisms to reduce the amount of macroplastic debris flowing into our rivers and ultimately into the marine environment. A similar study, but a very different geographical environment. Professor Troyce looking at a litter boom system in the Ungeni, a much steeper, faster flowing river. And also we know we've seen those images of the waste washed up along the shores of the KZN coastline. There was a lovely South African Journal of Science special edition that was published on the status quo of marine plastic pollution, what we know, with various research authors looking at different aspects around marine plastic pollution. Further study by Anton Neyman of the CSR is starting to look at the impact of marine plastic debris on ecosystem services and the economy. And very often we face this when people say, yes, you know, it ends up in the marine environment, but I don't eat fish or I don't see the impact of it. Sometimes we need to look beyond just the environmental impacts to also understand the economic impacts of waste and pollution. And this was a really important study to understand what are the economic impacts of the leakage of plastic and broader waste and pollution into our environment. Another equally, as I mentioned earlier, the open burning of waste, research done by Dr. Roberts at Central University of Technology, looking at the health and environmental impacts of open burning of waste on communities. And I think we're seeing this more and more, as I mentioned earlier, this open burning of waste. And then last in this particular area is the research just recently completed in the last few months by Professor Roos from Northwest University on understanding waste management in South Africa's protected areas. So within our national parks, how is it being managed? And again, a very close link here to tourism and understanding the economic impacts of waste mismanagement. Then we get into what I think is probably the largest of the portfolio investment under the waste roadmap, which was the technology solutions. And yeah, the logic in investing in this space was the easiest way to divert waste away from landfill is to find high value alternative uses for the waste or for what is in the waste. So it's around unlocking high value opportunities from waste streams. In the agri and agro-processing waste, so essentially in organic and biomass waste, we funded a large number of projects here which align very closely with sort of the biorefinery thinking. You can see the different types of waste streams that we focused on: forestry biomass, sawdust waste. There was canola fines, cornstarch, maize stalk, sugarcane bagasse, again sugarcane waste chicken feathers, which was a really interesting study and really certainly captured my imagination, and then starch waste. And what's common in all of these, even though the organic waste streams differ, or the agri and agro-processing waste streams differ, the common thread is understanding what lies within these waste streams and what can be unlocked in terms of high value product recovery, whether it be palm oil or nanocrystalline cellulose fibers or bioplastics, for example, or MELs. What are the valuable products that reside within these waste streams? Continuing that, you can see some of the other: mango waste, wheat, fruit juice waste, citrus waste, solid confectionery waste, food waste. So now we start to get more into the food waste streams, post-harvest losses again from food waste. And again, exactly the same logic is how do we find value in these agri and agro-processing waste streams? Because if we can find value, we can divert these waste streams from disposal to land, very often disposal to uncontrolled or controlled dump sites, and rather into new economic opportunities. And if the generator of the waste is not able to unlock this potential, there is certainly potential for small and medium-sized businesses to partner with the generator and to actually run small businesses around these different waste stream opportunities. Then we get into electronic waste, the fastest growing waste stream. There was some foundational work that Mintech did for us in terms of understanding the e-waste technology landscape. So in terms of the pre-processing, processing, dismantling landscape in South Africa, what is happening with our e-waste, what is the movement of e-waste, and then also importantly, as we saw more lithium-ion batteries come into the country, what are the opportunities for greater recycling of lithium-ion batteries in South Africa? And I think what we found through both of those studies is that at that stage, we export large volumes of our e-waste, and even there it's cherry picking out the printed circuit boards where the value lies, the metals lie, and those tend to get exported to other countries in the global north that then extract that value. And again, certainly not a complete list of products, but you can see some of the e-waste streams that they were looking at: fluorescent lamps, lithium-ion battery waste, rare earth magnets, again, printed circuit boards, lithium-ion, and some of these as well we'll be delving into a lot more detail in the upcoming Waste Roadmap virtual conference. Looking at plastic waste, again, we know that certainly for some of the polyolefins, we've got fairly low mechanical recycling rates in South Africa. So can we find high value solutions for plastic waste generated in South Africa. And another really interesting that captured my imagination was the plastic waste in road construction project undertaken by the CISA that showed that through tested both the wet and dry method, that in fact the application of plastic into road construction improved the actual wear and tear and functioning of the road surface. Looking at different thermal treatment options, the work of Stellenbosch University of UKZN, pyrolysis solutions for non-recyclable fractions of plastic. Looking then into the bio-based plastic materials, so end-of-life options, and in fact recycling opportunities. Can we actually recycle bio-based plastics, that it's not necessarily only for single use and then for disposal to composting facilities. The production of metal organic frameworks from waste PET, again, non-recyclable fractions of PET that was done by Dr. Wren while still at the CSIR. And then into our tire waste, the work of Dr. Slangoti from Northwest University, looking at the compatibilization of polyethylene and waste tire crumb for usable TPEs. Another really interesting, and this was actually a request that was made to us, was to understand the thermal aging of plastics. Concerns were raised that very often when you come into contact with plastic furniture or plastic items in play parks, very often there's a sense of odors coming from that plastic material. And so it was to explore the VOCs and the thermal aging of plastic that had been reused, for example, in furniture or walkways or play park areas. So that's just a little glimpse into the portfolio of projects that were funded under the Waste Roadmap. And I wanted to just touch on some of the trends that we've also seen. And this is in here, I'd really like to say a very huge thank you to the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, formerly under the leadership of Dr. Henry Roman while he was still there, and now under Alina. I'm hoping that both of them are on the call. And certainly the support and commitment that we've seen from the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation over the last decade. As at the 31st of March 2024, the total funding investment that the DST had made into this program was 125 million. The majority of that has gone into this portfolio of grant projects that you've seen. And while it was only a small fraction of the original funding ask of the roadmap, it was around about 3.2% of the original funding ask, I do believe that we've been able to achieve meaningful impact. And again, I'll touch on some of that through this investment that has been made. A total of 71 grant projects awarded to 17 different public research institutions, universities and science councils. 59 of those directly under the Waste Roadmap. 12 were during this period in between the Waste Roadmap and government's new circular economy strategy. What also came out really importantly was the catalytic nature of the DSTI's funding investment, so that while we may not have received all of the funding that we had hoped for to give effect to the roadmap, this funding has been very catalytic in nature. Speaking to our grant holders, 75% have said that they've been able to use this grant funding to secure additional funding post their grant, including international funding, with around a matching ratio of 1 to 0.8, and that's conservative. So we believe that it's almost a 1-to-1 matching ratio. For every rand that the DSTI puts in, there's an additional rand that's unlocked through further funders. Another really important part of this roadmap is it's not just about research for the sake of research. This is about also building the next generation of scientists, of engineers that will move into the waste sector. This is an investment in our youth, both undergraduate and postgraduate students that have worked on most of these grant projects that we've seen. As at the 31st of March, again, 2024, we had 55 students funded under the roadmap that had completed their degrees. Another 32 have since completed then, with a further 29 in the final stages. However, sadly, over the 10 years of this roadmap, 25 students actually withdrew before completing their degrees, 64% of whom were female students. And I think this really highlights some of the the societal challenges that young women face in terms of furthering their university education and postgraduate studies, and something that we continue to work really hard on to ensure that these figures drop. We also did see a significant withdrawal of students during the pandemic, students who realized that to give maximum benefit and effect to their education, they wanted to step away. And we hope that those students do return post the pandemic to complete their studies. But not only about our youth, it's certainly also an investment in our staff within our universities and science councils within academia that will continue to train the next generation of young students. And again, when we interviewed our grant holders, 68% of them confirmed that the investment that had been made in them on the grant project had significantly improved their career trajectory, which is really encouraging to see that it was around advancing the careers of our researchers and our academics as well. So these are all figures that I'm really proud of in terms of the impact that we're achieving. We actually, the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation commissioned a student track and trace study, which was completed last year. It was undertaken by the HSRC. And again, figures that I really love to see when we hear in the news around, for example, postgraduate students or university graduates that can't find employment. We don't see that necessarily reflected here of the students that we've supported. So a strong employment success rate with 73% of the graduates successfully transitioned into employment. 14% of the graduates had opted to study further. More than a quarter, 28% of the graduates found work within 1 month of graduating. And this for me really suggests that what they are learning, the projects that they are working on, are very relevant to business and to industry and to government. 40% of those that had found work were working in large enterprises. Not all of the graduates, though, did take up employment in the waste sector. And there we say, well, they're adding their skills to other economic sectors. So certainly by no means a loss to the South African economy. But of the graduates that were working in the waste sector, what I love to see was 52% indicated that they were very unlikely to move away from the waste sector. So hopefully we have them hooked and they're excited to see how we continue to transform the waste sector and unlock the environmental, social, and economic benefits. So reflecting on this last part, and I know I've taken a lot of time around the waste roadmap, but I do believe the impact of the waste roadmap has been towards unlocking technology opportunities, again, finding the value in our waste streams, evidencing decision-making. Many of these studies we know have gone in to inform decision-making. They've also gone in to preempt and inform policy development and implementation, and hopefully ultimately to support business to de-risk and to scale and to address the waste management challenges that they are facing. And so with that, it brings us to the new National Circular Economy, Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy. And as I said, the Waste Roadmap was a precursor to that. So we had 10 years of learning under our belt that we could use to make sure that we really developed the new circular economy strategy that was going to give maximum effect to this. Why? Because I think never before have we had access to so much global, regional and local evidence that highlights our increasing global demand for natural resources, the associated environmental and human health impacts, and the depletion of these finite resources. And as I said right at the beginning, the DSTI has taken this broad definition that the circular economy is about sustainable resource management. So it's about how we as South Africa use our resources in the face of these increasing demands for natural resources. We've seen over the past decade that there have been 4 main drivers of the circular economy transition. 2 of them I consider as threats to society, to countries. 2 of them I see as opportunities. So probably the oldest and the first of the drivers that we saw emerge was the issue around resource scarcity and security. We see this particularly now as well. The discussions around critical raw materials or critical minerals, which countries need to support, their energy transition, their AI transitions in support of defense and security. There's a lot of discussion around critical minerals. The second threat or driver was the environmental, and we've seen the work of the International Resources Panel, first published in their 2019 Global Resource Outlook, and then the more recent 2024 Global Resource Outlook, which showed that the extraction and processing of resources is responsible for just over 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. If you also include land use change impacts, it accounts for around about 60% of greenhouse gas emissions, and it accounts for over 90% of biodiversity loss and over 90% of water stress. So if we're going to address these big global environmental challenges that are facing us, we have to rethink our relationship with the extraction, processing, and use of resources. And then the opportunities that we've seen, and I think this was very evident during the pandemic, where we heard these statements like a green economic recovery, to build back better, was that governments were seeing the socio-economic opportunities in a green and a circular economy, an opportunity for new businesses to emerge and to thrive, an opportunity to create jobs in the green and circular economy. And so the white paper on science, technology, and innovation published by the then Department of Science and Technology recognized the circular economy as a new source of economic growth, but they were also quite cautious in terms of saying, well, what does it mean for us as South Africa? Let us understand what our drivers are, first of all, in the global south, but also as a developing economy. And so in response to that, the DSTI commissioned 2 studies. The first study was around understanding how circular the South African economy is, and the second study was around looking into the opportunities for a more circular economy. So the first study that was undertaken by the University of Cape Town, funded by the DSTI, as I said, was to look at how circular the South African economy is, and it was a material flow analysis led by Professor von Blotnitz at UCT, which showed to some degree, I think, what we knew, but provided the evidence for the fact that we're a highly extractive-based economy. We have a strong mining-based economy. We mine, we extract, but we export in unbeneficiated form, with large throughputs of material, solid, liquid, and gaseous through our economy. It also highlighted, unfortunately, that very little of South Africa's resources goes into its own stock build. And you can see that tiny little square down in the middle of the diagram. And that's our own infrastructure. That's our roads, our railways, our buildings, our dams, our networks, our infrastructure. And so it suggests that essentially our resources as a country are being exported for others to build and further their economy, with a small amount of material cycling back into the South African economy. The data suggested that we were around about 7% circular, which is very much in line with what we see as the global average, and for many countries that have since published their own studies. But I would also argue that there's a high level of circularity that lies within our informal sector, driven by poverty, driven by need. We see, for example, a lot of work happening around refurbishment, repair, reuse in our informal communities. The second study, as I mentioned, was understanding where the opportunities lie for a circular economy transition in resource-intensive sectors of the South African economy. So it first of all asked this question, is resource scarcity a driver for South Africa to transition to a more circular economy? And that was the mining study that was done. It asked the question, is climate mitigation a driver for South Africa to transition to a more circular economy? That was the climate one. And then we looked at agriculture, manufacturing, energy, water, human settlements, and mobility to understand, first of all, the level of uptake and awareness of circular interventions in these sectors, the drivers for transitioning to greater circularity in those spaces, and then also what were some of the challenges and constraints to fast-tracking circular intervention. The first question, is resource scarcity a driver? The answer is yes, surprisingly. To be honest, I thought, well, surely we must have hundreds of years of resources left in the ground. That study found that we had 18 minerals that were identified as critical or strategic, 5 of which had less than 50 years of economically viable mining remaining, assuming we did not find new reserves. But also, unfortunately, for those 5, most of those resources are actually exported out of South Africa, which means that we have very little ability to drive circularity on those products at end of life. So if we export platinum that goes into the global automotive sector, into catalytic converters, for example, we have very little to no ability to get those catalytic converters back into the South African economy to extract our platinum. Since this study, government has published their own critical mineral strategy, which is fantastic to see, and hopefully to guide, again, how we manage and use our mineral and metal resources in this space to unlock greater circularity. The study also found that there is opportunity in our mining sector as we transition to greater circularity. Is climate mitigation a driver? Yes, absolutely it is as well. The study found that implementing circular interventions in our energy, mobility, and agriculture sectors had almost a climate stabilization wedge effect, in that it could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 34% in 2050. This was further reconfirmed in a study recently completed by the CISA, where we were one of a few countries to pilot the application of the UN's nationally determined contribution circular economy toolbox in South Africa, and looking there specifically at material circularity. And what it found as well is that the application of 8 circular economy interventions in combination could reduce emissions by 52%, specifically in our building construction and civil engineering construction subsectors that were highly carbon and resource intensive. So again, a second study reconfirming from a material circularity perspective the climate mitigation driver for South Africa to adopt and to transition to greater circularity. Many of you may have seen these slides presented over the last 2 to 3 years that have come out of these studies. I use this very often just to sensitize people to what are we talking about when we talk about circular economy interventions in manufacturing. Circular design for manufacturing, additive manufacturing in this space, resource efficiency and cleaner production. For some of these, South Africa has a very strong footprint already. So the work that the National Cleaner Production Center, for example, has been doing around resource efficiency and cleaner production. You can see those ones down, the lower ones with the blue arrows, already a high level of readiness to adopt these interventions, whereas others with the yellow arrows still to understand what are we talking about when we talk about chemical leasing, for example, within the manufacturing sector. What do we mean by green steel manufacturing? So a lower level of readiness to adopt those interventions. Similarly, within agriculture, what are we talking about when we talk circular economy in agriculture? It's not only composting of organic waste, but it's things like zero tillage, things like biogas production. How do we use digital or mobile platforms? And equally there, you can see with the blue arrows somewhere, we already have a very high level of readiness and implementation. So precision agriculture, for example, mixed farming, crop rotation or intercropping, we already have a high level of readiness and implementation. Whereas others like equipment sharing, if people can't afford a tractor, there's a wonderful example elsewhere in Africa where you can hire a tractor as a farmer almost as you would be able to hire a ride share like an Uber. So things like equipment sharing or digital platforms, a lower level of readiness for implementation. Water, we know again the data, and I think many of us have already been impacted by water insecurity over the last sort of year, the water shedding that we're seeing happening, the breakdown in infrastructure, the non-revenue water and leakages that are occurring. We also know the last modeling that was done would suggest that water demand will exceed supply by 2030 in South Africa. So is that a cap on the South African economy? We've seen the impact of load shedding and energy insecurity as a cap on the South African economy. Does the same apply in terms of water security? So what do we talk about when we talk about circular water? And again, somewhere we have a very good footprint and a level of readiness, and possibly because of the recent droughts that we saw in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, things like water conservation, water demand management have become part of the DNA of those regions. But there are other areas like circular design or the use of 4IR technologies in the water space where there's a lower level of readiness to adopt. Human settlements, so how do we live, work and play within our cities and towns? How do we use resources? And a lot of really exciting circular economy interventions in this space, some of which, again, we have a high level of readiness. You know, the pandemic, for example, moved us towards virtualization, moved us towards working from home. So we already have a high level of implementation there. But others like loose fit long design. So how do we build buildings for adaptive use and for flexible use? How do we rethink, you know, for example, schools that after maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon sit vacant? How else can we use buildings post their first use? So again, a lot of really innovative applications for circularity within the human settlement space. And then also mobility. How do we move goods, services, people around our country? And again, some very insightful, interesting, innovative circular interventions. And I think what really broke my heart when I first read this report was the number of South Africans that spend a significant amount of their day walking to and from work or walking to and from school. And so how do we rethink mobility in South Africa to improve quality of life? Many of these also, again, we have a high level of readiness and adoption, sustainable urban drainage, vehicle efficiency, mobility as a service. We start to see more and more rideshare coming into the space. The flexible working arrangements, again, has been part of South Africa's DNA over the last 5 to 6 years. But then others with a much lower footprint. And I do love this idea of the 15-minute city. You know, how do you get access to everything that you would need within, you know, 15 minutes of a walk or bicycle ride from where you live? Climate resilient transport infrastructure. I think more and more our cities and towns are seeing the impact of extreme events, of changing climates. And so how do we build our transport infrastructure to be resilient in the face of climate change? And so with these two studies as background, understanding the current levels of circularity, understanding the opportunities and constraints in these resource-intensive sectors, the white paper on science, technology and innovation recognized the circular economy as a cross-cutting initiative. It also recognized the digital economy as a cross-cutting initiative. And it identified 3 priority resource-intensive sectors, mining, agriculture and manufacturing, that stood to benefit from greater investment and activity in science, technology, and innovation. And so the approach that we took with the circular economy intervention was to look at the interface of the circular economy and mining, the circular economy and agriculture, and the circular economy and manufacturing. And so this brings me to government's new circular economy strategy. It was developed through consultation with key stakeholders between 2023 and 24. As I said, it was aligned with the priority economic sectors identified in the white paper and decadal plan at this interface. And I was relieved and pleased when it was approved by the executive of the Department of Science Technology in December of 2024. And the vision of this circular economy strategy is to produce and use science, technology, and innovation to support really important words here and very carefully selected an inclusive, a just, and a climate resilient circular economy transition in South Africa. So how do we move forward from this? Now that we have the strategy, the waste roadmap is merged into this document, we bring this 10 years of experience with us. What does it look like? So within the strategy, these 3 interface sectors. Within mining, there are 3 priorities that have been identified. The first of these is resource security. So it's understanding South Africa's minerals and metals resource base, and very much within this conversation of critical raw materials or critical minerals. The second focus area is resource efficiency, and this looks on mine site. So how do we improve resource efficiency, energy, water, materials, in our mining applications, things like precision mining, reducing the generation of mining waste, energy efficiency, water efficiency on mine site. But also we see, for example, mines partnering with their neighboring communities to look beyond just their own mine waste, but also in terms of synergies and symbiosis relationships with the waste being generated in their communities. The third one is around diversifying feedstocks, and this speaks very much to the issue of urban mining, to electronic waste, to end-of-life vehicles, to other metal waste streams. So does it make sense, for example, to sink a shaft 5 kilometers underground when we still have significant quantities of waste electrical and electronic equipment sitting in cupboards or basements or garages that are not actually entering the South African economy or our value chain? So how do we ensure that we get these other products at end of life back into the South African economy where we can recover these minerals and metals? Within agriculture, we have four STI priorities. Again, the first is resource efficiency. The fact that agriculture is our largest user of water in South Africa. If I remember correctly, I think it's 61% of all water is used within agriculture. So how do we actually decouple the production of food and feed from water consumption? The second is around regenerative agriculture, so to rethink how we farm. Can we support, for example, small-scale farmers to adopt more regenerative practices like zero-till, like permaculture, of using more organic fertilizers or pesticides in the production of food and feed? The third is around agro-processing. So that's got a very close link to the manufacturing sector. It starts to talk to issues around sustainable packaging. It talks to food losses and waste, for example, in the agricultural value chain. And then lastly, biorefinery. And here is there's this very strong link back to the waste roadmap of how do we unlock high value products from these residual organic waste streams through biorefinery approaches. So all of those agri and agro-processing waste streams that you saw earlier, how do we unlock opportunity through biorefinery? Under manufacturing, we also have four priority areas. Again, resource efficiency and cleaner production. So how do we work with industry in manufacturing to reduce their energy, water, and materials consumption? Really importantly, circular product design. And there was a very interesting conversation that happened earlier this week around on this topic in Cape Town, is how do we improve the design of products that either are being manufactured locally or are being imported into the country to ensure that we have design for circularity, design for repair, design for remanufacturing, design for recyclability. Advanced manufacturing, a lot of innovative new technological approaches that can support industry to reduce the amount of waste that they are generating or to improve their efficiency. So things like additive manufacturing, for example, green manufacturing technologies. Again, a strong focus there around decarbonisation, which links back to the climate mitigation driver that we saw earlier. And then remanufacturing. And this is one that particularly excites me because I do believe there is significant opportunity to drive greater remanufacturing on the African continent. How do we extend the life of products before they become waste? And there's some sectors here that make logical sense in terms of remanufacturing, things like the automotive sector, like electrical and electronic equipment, medical devices, for example. And there are a number of these sectors where I believe manufacturing could play a really important role in terms of unlocking new economic and social opportunities. So those are the three interface priority sectors and the specific subsectors that they've identified. As with the waste roadmap, we have clusters again, so strategic planning, technology solutions, resources and environment and society. These are the pillars within which we function. And to ensure that South Africa's circular economy transition is based on sound evidence, the fourth cluster is this modeling and analytics cluster. So the data that's being generated, the modeling, the tools that are being applied to better understand the decisions that are being taken around our transition to greater circularity. The five enabling measures, so enhancing intergovernmental, intersector and multi-stakeholder collaboration. This is not something that the DSTI can or even wants to do on its own. You would have seen from the previous slides that almost every government department has a role to play in the circular economy transition, whether it be Department of Agriculture or Human Settlements or Transport, Environment, Department of Forestry, Fisheries, Environment, Trade and Industry. This is really around collaboration to support South Africa's transition to a more circular economy. directing greater financial flows towards circular economy STI activities, really importantly integrating higher education and training into this, building and using an evidence base for a circular economy, which really is imperative that our transition and our decisions and our policy are all strongly evidence-based. And then enabling implementation through business support, through capacity building, and through demonstration. And I'll reflect on this, I think, in my closing slide, this point around business support. So building on the success of the various roadmaps that have been implemented, the following funding streams are now currently being implemented. They were given effect last year in 2025. The grant funding instruments that we are continuing with, there's the earlier stage research grant, which is our STI grant, which includes student support. So we will continue to support undergraduate, postgraduate students working on these grant projects. And then really importantly, this one that I mentioned around business support is the demonstration grant. And the intention of this grant is to bring our universities and science councils closer to business and industry, to help business and industry to de-risk, to scale, and to adopt circular practices through this partnership. We've also launched 3 circular economy initiatives, and I'll expand on those, I think, if not the next slide, then a later slide. So again, let me give you a flavor of some of the projects that we are already supporting at the outset of our circular economy strategy. These were the first of the projects, the demonstration fund projects, the first to be awarded. There was the automated refill station project. This project has been completed, and many of you may have seen the lovely YouTube video. It's called Skubu. It's based in Diepsloot, where community members can bring their own containers, they can tap and they can refill on a number of different foodstuffs as well as household products, detergents, at a significantly lower cost than what they would pay in a supermarket, for example. And so we're really excited to see how Sonke and Skubu take this initiative forward and how they roll this out across further communities. There's the biodegradable mulch film, and there's also a lovely video for this one that you can find on the CSIR's YouTube channel. Dr. Vincent Ojijo from the CSIR. This is a biodegradable mulch film that is being trialed on a pineapple farm in the Eastern Cape with significant benefits in terms of the reduced need for herbicide spray because the weeds don't grow up between the actual pineapples, reduced water consumption, faster growth times for the pineapple, which means product to market sooner. And again, demonstrating this technology in field to understand, because I think any researcher knows that moving from laboratory to full-scale application comes with its own hiccups. And so really understanding how these technologies work at scale and in field. The interlocking building blocks are being undertaken by Aubrey at the CSR in our Durban office. These are building blocks that are made from recovered construction and demolition waste and glass waste. And again, linking back to those earlier studies around the illegal dumping of waste, if you drive around our cities and towns, you'll know that probably the most frequently dumped waste streams, illegally dumped waste streams, is building rubble, waste glass, which very often, just because of the weight of the material, doesn't go back into the recycling economy. And yeah, working with an industry partner, they've built these almost like Lego stacking blocks that you can construct up and deconstruct down. And there's a demonstration site at Use It in KZN, if anyone's ever interested in going to look at the actual house that has been built out of these Lego interlocking building blocks. There's the campus 1 hectare circular farm that's being driven by Professor Swilling at Stellenbosch University. And this was an abandoned piece of land within the city of Cape Town, close to a waste facility. And the intention there is to demonstrate a number of small-scale decentralized organic waste circular technologies, from chicken farming to black soldier fly to biogas, to agrivoltaics, for example, where community members can actually come and see the technology, can work on the technology, and where it makes sense, actually take these technologies back into their community. And the intention is to trial this to see if it can be replicated through other open spaces within the city. There's the project of Professor van Rensburg at Stellenbosch University on ethanol production from paper sludge waste. That project also just wrapped up towards the end of last year. And I think this speaks to the growing topic around green chemicals as part of countries' decarbonization strategies. How do we produce chemicals from alternative sources, not necessarily fossil fuel-based sources? Another project which is coming to a close end is the project by Coralie van Reenen from the CISA, which is a modular zero carbon roof and flooring system that actually utilizes alien invasive plant material in its innovative design. We've got ultrafiltration membrane for water reclamation being undertaken by Mintech as well, down in KZN. So again, demonstrating the application of this technology in terms of water treatment. And then another project which was completed was the project by Dr. Patnick at Cape Peninsula University of Technology on textile-to-textile recycling. And they're working with an SMME on needle felting technology. So many of these projects are close to completion, and some of them have already successfully been completed. And we are curious and excited to see how the industry or business partner continues scaling and replicating these circular interventions now beyond this initial demonstration project. These are the new demonstration projects that have just been awarded, and so they're starting now at the beginning of 2026. The project by Christo van der Hoeven from the University of Pretoria around circular mass timber building systems, asking this question: why do we not build more from a regenerative feedstock like timber? And again, a very interesting project that will be partnering with an industry partner to actually demonstrate and test this technology. Circularity in lithium-ion battery recovery. This is also a very exciting project that is being done with an industry partner looking at single-use vapes and how to recover and reintroduce these resources back into our economy. A follow-on project from one of the waste ones, I spoke earlier about the use of plastic in road construction. This is now being taken into a demonstration project with an industry partner, not now in terms of kilometers of new road construction, but specifically in terms of pothole repair. And can it equally be successfully applied in the repair of potholes in road surfaces using non-recyclable plastic fractions? We've got another project by Mintech on recycling of 3D printing scrap to produce suitable advanced manufacturing metal powder feedstock. A project by the CSIR on remanufacturing of worn out high value industrial cast iron components. And that's a mouthful to say, I think, as many of these are. But again, this is about how do we extend the life, in this case, of very expensive components within industry through remanufacturing and through the application of advanced manufacturing technologies. And the last one that we have under our demo projects is around bio-based biochar as functional additive for fabrication of coated textiles, being undertaken by Dr. Andrew at the CSR in Durban. And then some of our earlier stage STI projects. These are more sort of research focused, not necessarily always with an industry partner. A strong focus here on some agri and agro-processing waste streams. You can see, again, unlocking high value from rooibos processing waste. We have one with the wine industry on blueprinting circularity that's being driven from Stellenbosch University. Beneficiation of cherries and cherry waste being undertaken by the CSIR. Advancing the study that Professor von Blotnitz at UCT did around the material flow analysis for South Africa, so deriving specific circular economy indicators that we can use to measure South Africa's transition to greater circularity. And then we've got a project by Professor Dorfling from Stellenbosch University around lithium phosphate battery recycling, one around the feasibility of processing PGM-bearing low-grade ores and tailings, Dr. Robertson at Mintech, beneficiation of hemp and cannabis waste by the CSIR, and then lastly, the development and optimization of mushroom casing substrates being undertaken by Dr. Corsten at the University of Pretoria. So it's a portfolio of projects that are starting off now that really are exciting and which we believe will have a significant impact both in terms of advancing the way in which the waste is managed by the generators of these waste, but also in terms of unlocking new opportunities in the waste sector. And if anyone that's listening in on this webinar this afternoon is interested in these, reach out to the researchers that are involved. You can reach out to myself if you want to enter into an engagement or a discussion around these. We look forward to that. So I'm starting to wrap up now because I'm hoping that people haven't nodded off while I've been talking for near on an hour. But I wanted to just highlight some of the last activities that we're driving. And this is, I mentioned earlier, these 3 different initiatives which are part of our instrument or toolbox. And the idea here is to embed a lot of this work within our national system of innovation that will essentially outlive and outlast the circular economy strategy. And so aligned with the 3 priority resource-intensive sectors of government's STI white paper and decadal plan, we've launched and awarded the South African Circular Minerals and Metals Initiative, which was awarded to the Centre for Sustainable Mining at Northwest University in Potchefstroom. We've awarded the South African Circular Agriculture Initiative to the Green Futures Hub at the University of the Free State, and we've awarded the South African Circular Manufacturing Initiative to the National Cleaner Production Centre, which sits within the CSIR. And all 3 of these initiatives are currently developing their own more detailed sub-strategy. I've shown you the high level, 3 for mining, 4 for agriculture, 4 for manufacturing. They are now unpacking that into further detail that will help to drive these strategies and the parent circular economy strategy forward. They are intended to operate through a hub and spoke model. So they will not do everything themselves because we know that there are other universities, science councils, partners that already have mature levels of capability in some of these areas. And so the intention is to build a collaborative network, this hub and spoke partnerships across our national system of innovation. They are also intended to operate as living labs. So in other words, where we actually co-create projects between the national system of innovation and business and industry, where we can sit down with business and industry at a pre-competitive level and say, what are the big challenges that you are facing where science, technology, and innovation can help you overcome those challenges? Now let's put resources towards that we can solve these issues. And ultimately, and I think I've said this a few times, that this investment is not just research for the sake of research. We want these initiatives to work closely with business and industry to ensure that the private sector can adopt and scale circular interventions, that we really see the impact of this investment, not only through the capability and the investment, for example, in our academics or in the youth of our students that are being made, but also in terms of the private sector impact. So, Katerina, Mark, my concluding slide this afternoon. I think if you only remember these points, it's hopefully these 4. The circular economy calls for disruption. It calls for innovation. It calls for a system change. And as such, I think there's a very strong role to play for national systems of innovation. I think we've learned from the Waste RDI roadmap that our universities and our science councils are crucial to evidencing our circular economy transition. They are crucial to helping the private sector to de-risk and scale circular interventions, but also really importantly, as you will see from many of the earlier stage STI projects, in developing new innovative circular economy solutions. But ultimately, I do believe it's business and industry that's going to drive the circular economy transition. It has to make business sense for them to adopt these interventions, to adopt these technologies, obviously with the right enabling policy environment that comes from business. And so how do we support business in making sure that these interventions are profitable, in that they do make business sense, in that they do want to adopt and to scale them? And I think to achieve this, if nothing else from the previous slides, no one can do this on their own. It's going to require partnerships. It's going to require greater collaboration. And I think we already have a wonderful network of people in this space between industry, business, academia, government, NGOs, civil society. And it's about how we all walk this journey together to make sure that South Africa is decoupling its development from resource consumption, that the waste streams that we are producing, we find value from, that those resources flow back into our economy, that ultimately improves quality of life. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Linda. And we already have some questions in the chat. Okay. So Mark can unmute people because all of you guys have been muted for a reason as well, so that we can listen with all our ears to Prof Godfrey. Thank you so much for the presentation, going in so much detail and reflecting on the journey of the last few years. It's a lot that has happened, and it's really, really wonderful to see this coming together. Mark, I'm also monitoring the chat on my side, but please also shout at me if I'm missing any of the questions. So I'm just starting from the top. If someone also wants to speak to Prof Godfrey, just please put up your hand and then we're going to unmute you in the background. So Flick has the first question. He or she posted, "What an excellent presentation, thank you. A question is, improving trust in remanufacturing within the informal sector is a significant barrier for scaling circular value chains. How can this be addressed societally? Can the SDI for CE, through its projects, address some communication and policy issues and contribute to recognizing existing skills in the remanufacturing space? How can the compliance landscape in South Africa be prevented from imposing unrealistic compliance burdens?" So it's basically 3 questions.
Sure, Flick. How could you do that to me on a Thursday afternoon? I mean, that is a very deep question, and probably one we could spend a whole afternoon on. Yeah, I mean, this issue around repair and refurbishment in the informal sector, it was a part of a discussion that was held earlier this week. And I feel like if I give you a rapid response to this question, I'm going to do it an injustice, because it does require a lot of thought. And I think, yeah, I don't want to rush my answer to that. And this is not a way of me copying out of answering your question. It's just that we need to work on awareness, this issue around right to repair and access to training material, to the parts that can support repair. But ultimately, a lot of the informal repair that is done for consumers who probably can't afford to take their products to a formal repairer. And we need to recognize that this repair is being driven again by poverty and by need. And maybe that's okay, because the consumer there is getting to extend the life of their product for however long it may be. It may not necessarily apply with an ISO standard, but the alternative would have been that, that cell phone or computer or whatever it was would have probably been dumped into a landfill site or something like that. So yes, awareness, education, policy in terms of right to repair, working closely, the work that Dr. Skuman at UJ did, for example, around training informal e-waste reclaimers as well. There's a lot that can be done in this space. That was just the first question. I can't recall what the second and third were, Katerina. Or maybe, otherwise I can pick these up with Flick afterwards as well, if there are other questions.
Linda, happy to chat offline. The essence of the question was really in terms of the projects that you are going to be funding with the DSTI in the STI for CE. Is there, how can I say, a willingness to embed issues around communication and improving trust in society in terms of the remanufacturing sector, if you fund such projects? But we don't have to discuss this in depth now. It's just really linking societal impact and communication into good research projects. That really was what it was about. Yeah. So thank you for your answer.
Thank you. And there as well, I'd encourage you, and I know that you have already, but to look into a lot of the excellent research being undertaken by our Saatchi Chair in Waste and Society, who at the heart of all of the research that they do is society, both the benefits, the constraints, the risks. I think a lot of what I have presented this afternoon is directed more towards sort of larger businesses and industry. But it's not to say that there hasn't been a lot of excellent work undertaken around the informal sector and will continue to be undertaken going forward.
Maybe I can also add to that, Linda. So Flick, there is the Sustainable Recycling Industries project also happening, which is funded by SECO. And there have been also some more informal training around e-waste and proper dismantling. And Linda was referring to Dr. Skuman as well with, I think, also UJPs. We conducted some informal training where the trainers were previously informal traders themselves that underwent a 2-year program of taking care of business. They then were upskilled to then train the informal sector. So you had a whole trainer value chain, and it was quite successful around safe dismantling. But obviously for that, we also need the infrastructure to be in place, right? So you need to have the space made available for the informal sector so that they can have a safe operating space as well. So I think there is a long way to go in South Africa. However, luckily the informal sector is recognized as an integral part, but I do think we can definitely do much more on that aspect as well. But also happy to connect you there with the different entities that have worked on that. I see a few more hands online, but let me just pose another question from the chat. So I'm going to swap in between as well. More of an administrative question. When is the cycle timelines for project proposals to be considered for circular economy happening, like the demonstration funds?
The timelines for the project or proposals?
The proposals. And
proposals.
I think the person also asked around circular economy approach for rural villages from human waste to value. So I think it depends on the call focus as well.
Yeah, so we normally issue our call for STI and demonstration fund projects in early June of each year, as it was done in June of 2025. At this stage, we are uncertain as to whether there will be a 2026 call. Because we have allocated a significant part of the DSTI's funding allocation to us in the projects that I've already showcased to you. If that changes for any reason, keep an eye out on social media platforms, emails that are sent out to our mailing list as well for an early June 2026 call. But at this stage, I'm not sure that we will have one. It may be the next call will be 2027.
Great, thank you. We are also going to share it through our platform if it becomes available. And then Mark, can I ask
again, can I just say is that, I mean, you can see from my presentation that we have a very rich network of researchers working at many institutions in South Africa. And so don't only rely on working through our calls, engage. If you're sitting, if you're from business or industry, engage directly with your local university or any of the partners that we've worked with on these projects already, where you can see there's potential synergy. Reach out to them and explore opportunities now already that you can start to work on things.
Great, thanks, Linda. And then I am going to hand over to Henry. You had your hand up first. Nice to see you again. Hang on.
Henry's
Allow
muted.
Mike. Sorry, Henry. Now you can speak. Sorry, you need to unmute yourself first. I can't do that for you.
I saw the mic went grey, so I thought it was unmuted.
Sorry.
Sorry. Firstly, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Linda, for a really excellent presentation on a long time period of work. And it feels weird to sit on this side as not part of the team any longer and asking a question to the team, having been part of that team for such a long time. But I think one of the things, just quickly, and I won't take too long, I can speak for a long time as well on this topic, but Linda kind of, I feel you glossed over a little bit in the development of the waste research sector in South Africa through this intervention of the waste RDI roadmap, because it was not a very big research cohort in the country when we started. But when we ended, it was quite a large number of researchers that had grown over time, despite some of the losses of students and so on. But my question is more, where I work now at the International Water Management Institute, we're a research for development or organization, so we do a lot more implementation work, is looking at the projects funded both by the RDI roadmap as well as now under the circular innovation work. And my interest being in agriculture and water is, have you thought about the next step? How do we translate those projects, or how do we scale them? Because the outputs are one thing, and the whole purpose behind the demo projects was how do we scale them? Because that's always the question being asked for impact, job creation, all those things that the government targets. But the complexity of scaling these types of projects are not as simple as a widget you manufacture in a factory and then send out and sell on a shelf. It's a little bit more complex. So have you thought about that at all? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. Excellent question. Good to see you. And thank you for the investment and the time and the passion that you gave to this project while you were at the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. So yeah, really excellent question, because obviously we don't want to fund these projects and then, you know, the last report is written and it's loaded up onto the project website and we walk away and that's it. And so there's been discussions that have been happening in terms of the pipeline of these innovations, whether it be into the Technology Innovation Agency, whether it be into, you know, other funders, venture capital funders, angel funders, whether it be to, you know, the sustainability units at banks in South Africa. How do we ensure that by the time we've completed some of these studies, we have de-risked them sufficiently that it's a logical next step to take them forward? Having said that, I mean, a lot of the STI projects are obviously early stage. You know, it's maybe TRL levels 1, 2, or 3 that aren't ready there yet. And so there it's around making sure that there are other funding stream opportunities that can advance it into TRLs 4, 5, and 6 to de-risk. But the pipeline is really, really important. And I think it was that logic that led us to the demonstration fund of this partnership between business and industry, because sometimes researchers, their comfort zone is not taking it beyond into practical uptake and implementation. They are excellent researchers and that's where they work, that's where they function. And so it's finding the right partners for our research community. And business, as I said, you know, business and industry will be the ones to drive this if it makes business sense. And if we can help business to industry to de-risk, inherently in that is this assumption that they will automatically take it forward because they can see the business case to be made. Thanks, Henry.
Great, thank you, Henry.
Question here, Katrina, I saw on the Q&A section. Arnold?
Yeah. Let me just, because there's Q&A and the chat, so I'm monitoring them, all of them, but I'll get to the Q&A as well, and I'm going to get to the hands online as well, but thanks, Mark, for that. Then there was a question from Kikana, and this is a very specific question, Linda, so maybe we need to reach out actually to the water researchers in the team. I study water resilience through atmospheric water harvesting, and most of these industries you've mentioned have resource efficiency as a priority. I understand that management will always be a priority, but I wanted to know how ready are industry for the adoption of this atmospheric water harvesting systems from your point of view. I've seen growing adoption of rainwater harvesting systems, desalination and water reuse systems. And through my research, I see a good foundation already for the adoption of atmospheric water harvesting systems. So not sure if you have that much detail.
Yeah, look, I mean, in a very, very previous life, I used to work in the water sector, but long since removed from that. So what I'm going to say is, all those online, I'm not sure how many we have at present. Start a chat conversation.
100%.
Let the chat box blow up around what people's thoughts are on that particular question. I know we've got a number of people from the water sector online. So yeah, I think it'd be best placed for others to answer that question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, then let me go over to a live question again. And the next one would be Lebo. That's online. So Mark, if you could unmute Lebo.
Everyone is unmuted. Just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah.
Oh,
Perfect.
okay. Thank you so much. Lebo Mashaba from Real PPE. I wanted to find out, thank you so much for a great presentation. I'm new in this space, and I was curious in terms of if you can point me to any research that has been done on PPE, both industrial and medical, where when like the life cycle of it, or the circular economy, if there is any research that has been done on that, because I have a vetted interest in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lebo. I cannot say that I've come across any research on driving greater circularity, or probably in this case reuse or recycling of PPE. Obviously, a concern, anything that would come out of the healthcare risk waste sector, which would be contaminated, we try to stay very clear of, just because of the human health risk. So I think there's certain resources, certain waste streams where it makes sense to destroy that material immediately, just in terms of human health protection. And we try not to recycle those particular items. But if anyone is aware of, again, if anyone this is a co-creation webinar. If anyone has an answer to that, feel free to pop it in the chat box. I'd also be curious to know. In fact, there was a wonderful discussion recently on LinkedIn around reuse of prosthetics, which also cannot be reused because of legislation. But for many of them could quite easily be reused. So there are a lot of questions arising in kind of the medical industry or medical sector right now with regards to reuse, repair, refurbishment.
Maybe, Linda, I can add to it. Back in the COVID times when I was still with UJ, we also looked at like building a ventilator that can be produced or like manufactured in South Africa. It was very nascent to the medical industry. So the Medicares and the likes, they were thinking about it, but it wasn't very much in the frontal lobe of the medical industry yet. There is more and more thinking about it. If you go on our website as ASIN, we have a coalition about healthcare technologies. So now here I'm talking about the technology, right? The really expensive equipment. What we see in South African hospitals, especially in the public sector, is unfortunately, and that is all linked to data management, is that we see baby incubators being pushed to the sides because the lights aren't being exchanged. So there we actually need the right capacity, but also the right logging of these equipments so that the maintenance is being kept up to date, basically. And obviously PPE, I would assume the second it's contaminated, it's hazardous waste, it gets incinerated in our country. There has been some projects on IV bags being manufactured into shoes for students. So there are some projects out there, but there's not that much in the medical industry, rather overseas where they have sharing platforms. But again, this is more on an equipment side and a human capacity side. So quite an interesting topic to dig deeper into. Okay, then I'm going over to the Q&A chat, to the next one, and that is, hi, Prof, how would digital passports add value to this great body of work you just presented? And there the hint is maybe also the European legislation that's going to kick in at some stage, especially for our export sector.
Yeah, also a very good question. And the one that I just didn't have time to touch on this afternoon is, you would have recalled that one of the second cross-cutting issue in the STI decadal plan is the digital economy. And so this issue around the interface between the circular and digital economy is also a very exciting space. Possibly one where we still need to do a lot more work in South Africa. So I think the digital passport and the tracking of resources using blockchain technology, using AI in this space to understand the movement of resources is really an important one. And we're seeing really innovative application of digital technologies, for example, in the construction sector, in that space. I think, we probably will get to a point where that becomes the norm, things like digital passports, especially in terms of the export market. Our capacity and readiness to adopt that right now is, I think, certainly something that we need to look at quite carefully. But I would love to see, in our portfolio of projects we're currently funding, we don't have any looking at that digital circular interface. And it would be nice to explore, I think, that particular area and the opportunities that lie there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a project by the UN that has recently kicked off, looking at different African countries globally on digital passports. They call it differently. So I would need to check out the name again and can give you some more information. That's more on creating a global governance framework around that and how to govern, obviously, the information also in a secure way and in a transparent way. So that's going to be quite an interesting project where they're also already including different African countries. So I hope that gives a little bit more insight as well. But I think the readiness will be quite key for on the ground, and then to actually test it at the end of the day, that will be quite exciting. But we do have blockchain, right? BenQ is already actually working with Coke and with small-scale farmers in Zimbabwe as well. That's not necessarily digital passports, but it actually makes the payment and facilitates the payment and trace and tracking of certain materials like PET bottles possible as well. So you do find some digital interventions.
I think, though, what this question also highlights, not necessarily only just the focus on digital passports, but I think as other regions and countries adopt more ambitious circular economy policy, we need to be aware as a country of the potential ramifications and implications of that, for example, on trade. We've seen it, for example, with the carbon border adjustment measures. And so, the question is, are our institutions closely monitoring what these policy instruments are that are emerging to make sure that our industry and business are ready for when they're implemented?
Yeah, I think that's going to be quite key. Yesterday with the manufacturing steel industry person I chatted to, the CBAM is quite a headache for them at the moment also to figure that one out. So we're going to watch the space carefully. Then I'm going over to another live question that's from Pierre. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, good day, and thank you for the talk. I really appreciate it. I think it was very, very good. As a small SME in the deep tech space, we use agricultural waste, or some of the biggest agricultural waste in Africa, to make product. But with that, our low-hanging fruit was cosmetic side. And on the cosmetic side, they use between 200 to 500 liters of fresh water for every kilogram produced or manufactured. So it at different streams, and then also regulation where we looked at a biocoherence system. But if I look at the LCA and I can say, okay, so much tons, I can divert from my carbon dioxide, which is 5.5 thousand, but because it's methane, it's not times 26. Where do I really have to look? Do I have to look, should I focus on more specifics like water or more on the waste? And then our platform is to create a bio-conversion platform for industry. So we're in talks with L'Oreal, we're in talks with Beiersdorf, and it's actually quite advanced already. So we're looking at digital biomarkers that we put in our product. But I've never been involved. It just at the moment it's snowballing, and I haven't had any guys from the CSIR, or I was involved with UNIDO now under the DSHIP program or Global Clean Innovation Program as a semi-finalist and a finalist. So what would you say, where should I go? Should I go, Anton did reach out to me under Anton Neyman, and I think I'm definitely going to have a talk with him. I already mailed him. But should I look more at universities right now? But I've got a PCT in most of the country, so I've got IP on it. Because also with IP, when you don't pay for it, and with deep tech, it's a long process. Validation is very important, so we do a lot of fingerprinting analysis. Would you say that I should speak to CSIR? Would there be funding? Because I understand there's a lot of things going on. What would be my next pathway? What should my playbook look like?
Yo, that's such a weighty question, Pierre. I feel the weight of that question. Look, there's certainly, I was just having a look to see who from Anton's team, if Valentina or William were in the webinar. But if Anton and you've already made contact in the chat box, have a discussion with Anton after this and their team that have capability in the LCA space, and explore what the opportunities are in assisting you going forward. I think your point around IP is one that very often I encounter with small businesses who have a fear or a reluctance to partner with academia or the research community in South Africa, this fear around losing IP and things like that. And there again, just make sure that IP, foreground IP are appropriately protected before you go into discussions. That would be my only point. There's certainly, partnering with academia should not mean that you have to give up any IP that you already hold.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. I've looked at the persons that we're using is Adams & Adams, Dr. Joanne Farman.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and she's very, very good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pierre.
Okay, fantastic. Linda, the questions are still coming in. The next one is Zach. You can also unmute yourself, and then I'm going back to the chat.
Go ahead, Zach.
Maybe having taken a break. Otherwise, we could move on to Liesel.
There's no little microphone next to Zach, so I'm not sure what the...
Okay, I'll chat to him on the back end.
Okay.
Liesel, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, good day. Thank you, Prof Linda, for the very, very informative presentation. I love to keep up with all these trends and things that's happening. I'm from the healthcare sector, so I always thought of maybe finding a solution with all the healthcare risk waste being treated. I mean, it's been treated through autoclaving or microwaving and then shredded. That's the content of that is there's such a high plastic content in there because the anatomical waste is not in there. It's been incinerated. So isn't there somebody that can investigate? I see that pothole projects that they are currently busy with. Can't you use that in some project like that? I mean, I would be delighted to get involved with somebody that we can explore on this journey. I always try and find a solution for waste management in the healthcare sector that can divert it from landfill. So we are currently doing extremely well, but I just think there's, if I think of the tonnage of what is produced daily or treated daily at those treatment facilities and the content of it, I think it's worth a try to go and see can't we use it in something else, maybe building material or roads or something. So just a thought from my side.
Thank you, Liesel. So I think here it's really, really important that waste coming out of healthcare facilities are segregated at source, that you keep the hazardous and non-hazardous components separately, and that you keep the hazardous component to a minimum. And that's where, separate containers within healthcare facilities are so important. The hazardous healthcare risk waste component for me is not even a waste stream that I like to entertain recycling on because of the human health risk. Even in terms of non-thermal treatment, that material is not 100% sterile when it comes out. The requirements are, for example, a log 6 reduction or something like that in terms of pathogen load. So there is still a risk of potential infection post non-thermal treatment, even if it may be small. So for me, thermal destruction of the hazardous component is a safe solution, and there are many projects now emerging to look at how you recover value from the bottom ash, for example, out of those thermal treatment processes, metal recovery and other. If we've done a really good job in terms of separating the hazardous and non-hazardous components out of the healthcare facility, then the non-hazardous part, then yes, absolutely. What can we do with that? What if that is clean that can go back into normal mechanical recycling? What if that could go back into innovative applications, whether going to road building or alternative building material or things like that? So again, I know that the Institute of Waste Management of Southern Africa used to have a healthcare risk waste interest group. I'm not 100% sure if they still do, if there's anyone on the Institute in the webinar who could perhaps advise. But, I think a working group like that would be well positioned to have this discussion around unlocking value from the non-hazardous component. Thanks, Liesel.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Then I'm going to hop over to the chat again, and I see that Henry has partially answered it, but I think we can dive a bit deeper into it from Graham. He says, the European Union is considered the leader in circular economy governance and implementation. In this context, what's your take regarding where South Africa is at policy, governmental and financial assistance for our local industry and service providers?
Thank you, Graham. So I think we've got a lot of work to do in that space. I'm asked very often this question in terms of who's leading in the innovative circular economy policy space. And I normally, someone's typing furiously.
Sorry.
It's Katerina ticking away there. And I normally point them in the direction of the European Commission, because I do believe some of the more advanced policies are emerging, like the right to repair, for example. So I think that at the moment we have got fragments of the right policy and legislation to drive circularity, still very much siloed between the different departments. And so we need to do a lot of work of understanding the synergies between our legislation. I also feel like we've got legislation that actually almost contradicts something we might want to do elsewhere. So actually looking at where policy and legislation is a constraint to drive greater circularity. So there certainly is the need for a study of understanding our landscape and how to give effect to greater circularity. On the incentive side, I would love to see more economic incentives for the private sector to drive, whether it be green or circular practices. I think, unfortunately, the South African government tends to err on the command and control and kind of the punitive measures to kind of enforce and to direct policy aspirations as opposed to economic incentives. And I do think there's space. We're seeing economic incentives appear elsewhere in the world. There's sometimes a concern that economic incentives can erode a tax base, but I think if you understand the implications of that, how do we dangle a carrot in front of business and industry to be more resource efficient? And I think there's huge untapped potential for that in South Africa and across the continent, to be honest. Thanks, Graham.
Great. Thank you, Linda. And then, Zach, I'm going over to you again. I'm not sure if you're able to unmute and speak. Let's try this again. Mark, he is unmuted, right?
Yes, he is unmuted, Gab.
So I don't know, Zach, if you want to try. Otherwise, you can also post your question in chat.
Yeah, I can't hear anything.
No, we need
I saw a little microphone mute there now. So at least there's a microphone.
Zach, can you try again?
Can you unmute, Zach? No.
Okay, no. Okay, cool. Then let me hop over into the chat again. Kabito, I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. Good afternoon, and thank you for the insightful presentation on rethinking mobility and climate-resilient transport systems. So someone has read maybe your technical report. My name is Nicolas, and I'm currently conducting research at Stellenbosch University focused on strengthening rural mobility in South Africa by leveraging waste and circular economy principles in road construction. In that context, do you see a need for integrated material mobility decision support system that aligns waste availability with infrastructure demand spatially? Okay, that's a handful. Should I reread this again?
I think my immediate answer to that would be yes.
Yes.
I mean, obviously it's around supply and demand. Where do we need resources? Where are there resources available? I think my only comment in that is making sure that we put the right resources into construction and into mobility. Again, I think I'm quite outspoken on using, for example, plastic in construction material, because while it may solve an immediate problem, it's creating a long-term problem down the road of, a future generation or business or whatever it is that now has to solve that problem. And that's where tools like LCA become so valuable and important. It's understanding what happens not only at end of first life, but end of second life and third life and fourth life. So if we put it into road material, for example, what happens when we pull up that bitumen? Is there a risk of having microplastics through wear and tear of that surface, depending on the method of application? So for me, the answer would be yes. I think it's important to understand resource availability and its potential application in road networks and systems, but making sure that we're not creating a significant environmental problem down the road for somebody else by using that material.
Great, thank you so much.
But it certainly sounds like interesting research you're doing, golly.
It does, especially in mobility. Okay, perfect. Tulani has another question. Thank you, Prof, for your insights. We are an SMME with a deep interest in urban mining, e-waste, and wood pellet circularity. What is your advice for SMMEs with a will to implement commercialized circular research-based initiatives? How can we partner with the likes of NCPC and other potential stakeholders who might be on the call right now?
Yeah. So I think it's really about knowing what the need is. What is the research need? What is the gap? You know, we already have a vibrant e-waste recycling community in South Africa. We've got a number of well-established e-waste recyclers. And the discussions with them have largely indicated that, you know, the biggest constraint is not sort of technology, it's access to the material. The fact, if you look at the last State of Waste report, you know, it was less than 10% of waste electrical and electronic equipment that was actually flowing back into the economy and back into the market. And they sort of said, if we can get access to the feedstock, we'll invest in the technology. You know, we can drop technologies into South Africa tomorrow with some level of localization or adaptation. So I think our biggest constraint at the moment when it comes to e-waste right now is just getting access to the material. And I understand, I don't know if we have any DFFE colleagues in the webinar this afternoon, but I know that they did some work, I think, with Public Works, because my understanding is that government is the largest producer of e-waste in South Africa as an entity, and it kind of speaks to, you know, state assets and procurement issues, and how do you get that end of life product back into the value chain. So I think if you understand specifically what your research need is, I mean, I've got a network of over 200 academics working in the space. You're welcome to drop me an email, and I can always put you in contact with, I think, you know, someone working in this. In terms of nodes of expertise, research expertise in e-waste, we've got Stellenbosch University, Mintech, UCT, Northwest University, where we've had active partnerships around e-waste. So, you know, any of those you could reach out to as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And then Sherry has a question, but I think that's like linking to all the previous conversations that we had. Is there enough economic feasibility research done to help descale? Is this next level? And I think this comes back to the financing and the scaling of these innovations.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. And I mean, as you rightly know, you know, waste management is at the heart of it an economic challenge. It's an economic flaw. Otherwise, people would already be doing it. It's the fact that for many of these waste streams, it doesn't make business sense to do anything else other than dispose it to a cheap landfill site. And that's why certainly for most of our technology projects, it's not just about proof of concept in the lab, but also techno-economic feasibility. So more and more of the studies that we're funding actually close with that last techno-economic feasibility assessment, that when you start talking to funders, you've got information, for example, on return on investment and, you know, CapEx costs and things like this. But I think there's certainly a lot more we need to do to mobilize funding into the space. And just, you know, yesterday, Katerina, we were at a workshop yesterday with UNIDO and around the important role of the financial institutions who have significant potential to direct where industry and business go through the financing that they provide. And more we're seeing financing houses, you know, move away from sort of fossil fuel based investments towards more green industry investments and things like that. So I hope that continues. I hope that we can mobilize a greater scale of investment to support these initiatives. But yeah, it's got to make business sense. And again, you know, you understand the EPR landscape really well in terms of, you know, EPR is there to essentially subsidize a value chain that right now doesn't make business sense to do so. And without that EPR kind of top up, we wouldn't be able to achieve kind of the impacts that we have been able to achieve in certainly in our, you know, some of our packaging waste sectors. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm just checking the chat if there is any other questions that I've overlooked. I might have overlooked one or two questions. So if I have, please raise your hand. Okay, Zach is coming to the party now. Thank you, Zach. And sorry that you had struggles with unmuting yourself. He said, thank you for the presentation, genuinely valuable work being showcased. I want to push on something though, because as a mechanical engineer, I sit very close to where products are born. That is very good. We all know that the most powerful circular economy lever is designed for disassembly. Thank you. Design for material purity, design for longevity, etc. Basically embedding circularity before the first drawing is released. My question is this: what are the specific mechanisms, whether regulatory, commercial, or within engineering, education, and professional practice, that you believe will most effectively accelerate adoption of design-led circularity in South African manufacturing? And who, in your view, needs to move first, government, the OEMs, or the engineering professional itself? I love that question.
Wow, Zach, I'm so glad we got you unmuted. Yeah, what an important question, because certainly the first half of my presentation was presenting about something when it's too late already. You know, it's already become waste, and how do we find value? And you're 100% spot on in that, you know, the best way to move towards circularity is to make sure that something doesn't become waste in the first place. And hence the importance of design, hence why I think it's number 2 in our bullet points under our circular manufacturing and under the circular economy strategy is design for circularity, design for repair, design for refurbishment and remanufacturing. And I think it's all of those that are required. I think there's a lot more that we need to do to work with design schools in South Africa, that students already start to think about design. I mean, I remember having an engagement with an academic about 2-3 years ago. They had developed this wonderful composite material that had, you know, excellent barrier properties and all kinds of things. And my question was, you know, what can you do with it? What do you do with it at end of life? And it was, you know, it hadn't even occurred to them. It had all of these great functional properties right now, which is what they were solving for. So design schools, absolutely. And I don't, you know, I almost want to say I would love to play in that space, but also I think you can see that there's kind of a lot that's already in our lane. And so the question is, who is it? Who is working with our education sector right now to make sure that this is built into curricula, that we are you know, capacitating the next generation from a design perspective? I think the big challenge, though, the kind of the flip side of that coin, is the fact that South Africa's manufacturing economy is sort of a shadow of its former self, with the result is that we import a lot of products into South Africa over which we have very little control on design. You know, the fact that cell phones come in, for example, where you can't replace the battery because everything's glued shut. And there, I think there's a role for policy to play. It starts to impact on trade, though, which starts to become very tricky. But I think, you know, as countries commit more and more to circularity, we are going to see policies being put in place that products put onto the market need to be 100% repairable, reusable, remanufacturable, recyclable kind of thing, to force the OEMs to think around design. I think the other thing as well, and there was a term coined yesterday for it, which I can't remember now, but it's basically these dual standards. The fact that an OEM will comply with, let's say, design in the EU because it's required under policy, but will not necessarily comply with the same requirements when they put their product onto a market in Africa. And I don't think that's right. I think, you know, it needs to be a level playing field, that if you are designing for a market that, you know, we need to benefit from that same design benefit, whether we have the policy in place or not. So yeah, a really great question. And ultimately, we know that if we're going to solve for circularity, it has to be done upstream long before it becomes waste.
Thanks, Linda. So Zach, we last year did a bit of training on circular economy in the manufacturing space as ASEN with SMEs and professionals. And that was run through UFS, so the University of Free State, and MERCITA. So there is an interest of the CITAs as well to train more on circularity, but as Prof Linda also pointed out, rightfully so, we obviously do have a lot of products coming into the country we have no control over. The products that we do produce in the countries might then also be dictated by global companies. So there needs to be many more chats and discussions taking place to actually enforce that as well. But I do think in general, it shouldn't just be an engineering education. It should actually be put throughout curricula, right? So this should also be included. And there was some discussion also around business schools, actually including circularity. I know that I think the UCT has done some in that regards around circularity, but we do definitely need much more awareness around circularity, and that it is a holistic concept and how it actually makes sense in the different disciplines, right? Because you also need to have the social scientists on board that actually study, let's say, consumer behavior. So I think there needs to be lots more done around how to educate people. We have done some master classes also as CSA to try to give some people some information, but obviously this needs to be rolled out much more holistically as well across the different institutions. Okay, Dan, are we having any more questions?
I can just see there's a really rich chat box that's been going on
Yeah,
here.
I know it's blowing up. That's why I can't keep.
We've got a wonderful community of practice that's now emerged on the sidelines of this webinar. So if we've achieved nothing else, it's we've linked people together.
We have, and that's great. I love that. And that's what CSA is supposed to do, right? To be the facilitating platform so that you guys can connect amongst one another. I think Alina from DSTI left a really valuable comment in the chat box. So I'm just going to read that out. Thank you, Linda, for the informative presentation. Gosh, my words are leaving me now. I would like to anchor your words that the Department of Science Technology cannot do it alone, and therefore we are inviting all stakeholders to participate in the implementation of the Circular Economy SDI strategy, which I think is very, very timely. Okay, let me check. There's some autoclave sites. Okay, there's some more information. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to butcher your name now. I'm really sorry about that. It's Latsi. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Thank you. See, I was close. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, you're okay.
So, Prof. Linda, is there a specific data set or repository you recommend for sawdust timber waste flows? And is it open access, or do we need to request permission to use it for research and project development? Very interesting question.
So I'm interpreting that question to be data around kind of the volumes of sawdust waste that is being generated out of our forestry sector. I think, Catherine, if you can just maybe type, or Mark can type in the chat box, I would say reach out to Varen or to Jerome down at the Biorefinery Industry Development Facility in the CSR's Durban office. You would have seen one of the projects that I listed there was the value recovery from sawdust waste. So yeah, I would engage with Varen or with Jerome and check with them. Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of a database on sawdust volumes or locations, but it may exist.
It might be worth, and I'm not sure how KG, the industry, the forestry sector is around the type of data. I assume they have some type of primary data available if they don't do anything with that byproduct themselves. Okay, perfect. Any last questions? You have 3 minutes. Okay, Flick is saying, I will see if I can find some sawdust data. Yes, thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
Flick knows the forestry sector well, so thanks, Flick.
Perfect. There's a connection. Okay, John, you need to be very quick now, but it's really nice to see you online again. I'm sure you're still based in the Free State. Please unmute yourself. Or are you not having a question?
I'm still in the Free State. My question was maybe one quick one. Just wanted to check, given, first maybe I should comment, I'm so happy with the demonstration site and the living labs. But my first question would be to say, what is it that maybe the time period that we can say we can use to measure the research output in terms of the actual GDP, not only in research publication and citing,
Sure.
but the actual GDP impact? What is the reasonable time period, that time frame that we can look into? Thank you.
Yeah, John, that's an extremely difficult question to answer because, as we know, it's very difficult sometimes to show a causal effect between research and uptake. And sometimes, literally we've had experience in South Africa where 15 years after research was done, it found its way into policy. So for me, that elephant is too big to chew. And the only thing I can do is that by working together with these individual projects and making sure that the projects don't only end with a dissertation or a journal paper, but ultimately, that those youngsters are going out into industry and finding work and employment and changing the sector from within, and that our researchers are working with business and industry to make our private sector more competitive, to make them more efficient, to make them more profitable. Those are kind of the indicators that I'd like to be tracking. in terms of impact rather than overall national GDP. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Are we up for one last question, Linda?
Yeah.
That's the last one.
I've still got a voice. That's
Perfect.
good.
I don't. June. Okay, she said, how does the circular economy strategy, so I think it's the STI for CE, does the strategy interface with the National Waste Management Strategy being finalized by the DFFE, where a circular economy action plan is being worked on? So how do these strategy interlink?
Thank you, June. Yes. So right from the beginning, we've wanted to make sure that first of all, the waste RDI roadmap, now the new circular economy strategy, you would have seen in terms of those requirements that we preempt policy needs, for example, that the research being done can be taken by not only DFFE, but by any of our line departments where there's alignment, and they can use that evidence to inform their policy development and uptake. And we've already seen examples of that coming out of the waste roadmap where it's had that impact. So yes, absolutely. We would hope that the evidence base that is being generated through this program ultimately helps DFFE give effect to their mandate and to the implementation of the National Waste Management Strategy. Having said that, we also do know that not everything in the National Waste Management Strategy is necessarily a research question. Much of it is around implementation, and it's around working with our municipalities, capacitating our municipalities that face significant constraints in terms of managing waste. But where we can, and where our evidence base can support government in the implementation of policy, we hope that we can achieve that. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much, Linda, for lending us your time and being so willing to answer all these questions. And also for you guys, we still have 89 people staying online with us. So we have actually gone over time, which is fantastic. So I'm very grateful for your insights and for connecting with one another. If you want to support CSA so that we can keep on running webinars and the lunch clubs that we do on a monthly basis, please rate our or fill in our survey. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it does support us to make sure we can keep on running Circular South Africa so that we can create this network, and hopefully that this network goes then beyond us, but also much more into the financial sector and obviously into the industry sector. With that, I'm going to wrap up the webinar. Thanks so much for Mark, my colleague. Thanks again for Linda for your time. Really appreciate having you online and all the people that have joined us today for this webinar. We're going to share everything in a post email, so don't worry, everything will be shared with you, and then you can connect with the right people as well. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
All